Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Tasty Tidbits Podcast. Get ready to receive rich, well-seasoned, and tasteful tidbits to transform your life. Each week, Dr. Tiffany comes to you with inspirational encouragement and thought-provoking interviews to help you revolutionize your walk with God. Are you hungry for more of His presence? Then get ready. And now, your host, pastor, author, and motivational speaker, Dr. Tiffany Watkins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Tasty Tidbits. I am your host, Dr. Tiffany Watkins, and I'm excited to have you again with us on today. And you know, all of us have gone through one point in our life where we've talked about to someone that we know or someone that we love, or we've all experienced going from tragedy to triumph. And today, my guest, Guy Morris, we're going to sit here and talk about his experiences of going through tragedy to triumph and leading up to his awesome books that he has that has become bestsellers in a lot of areas. And so we're going to talk about that today. But before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit more about Guy. Guy Morris is a published songwriter for Disney Records, screenplay writer for Sojourn Entertainment, a patent inventor, and a publisher of intelligent research thrillers. Since his 2021 debut as an indie author, Guy has released 3 post-pounding thrillers inspired by true stories, actual technologies, true global politics, and history. Guy's books have earned BookTrib's Best 25 Favorite Books of 2021, Reader's Favorite 2021, Gold Award 2021 finalist for Ian Book for the Year, and semi-finalist for Cinematic Book. And thank you so much for being a part today, Guy. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Tiffany, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Now, I just read a little bit about who you are and what you have done, but I'm telling you, the list goes on and on. So give the readers just a little bit more about yourself.
I am eclectic, to say the least. I have a very diverse background. I started off extremely poor. I was a homeless runaway at age 13. And through a series of miracles, I was able to go to college, where I saw it as my opportunity to change my stars. And so I was tireless and relentless in trying to work past the failures that I experienced to start off with, because I was pretty much functionally illiterate when I entered college. But I was able to graduate at the top of the dean's list with a number of awards and scholarships. And I think that perseverance has been kind of a key trademark. The ability to certainly hurt from my failures, but never wanting to allow my past to define my future. And so I've pursued many things in life. I've wanted to live a rich life. I went from such a state of poverty to the ability to have multiple degrees and work with Fortune 100 companies and work alongside VPs and CXOs and brilliant people, creatively, geniuses. I've really felt honored. And so I combine that with a sense of obligation that I can't just rest on my laurels. I have to earn the respect that I hope to gain from others. And so it's always set up a lifelong struggle for me to improve myself by whatever means necessary and possible.
And you know what, Guy, that is very important. And I'm glad you shared that with us today, because you had shared just about how you were homeless runaway, but you were also working with migrant workers, I think, at the time. You were living on the streets and even living on the freeway, like you said, at the age of 13. Wow. How did you get there, and how did you get past that?
Well, I try not to talk about my youth too much because it can trigger me. But it
Okay. Okay.
a pretty violent and abusive home.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Somebody said, "Did you grow up in the church?" I said, "No, I grew up in bars." Um,
Yes. Yes.
um, and 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 so yeah, there was a lot of violence. A particularly violent episode that involved um, uh, shooting at my stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I was either going to go to juvenile hall or I was going to try and make it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
It was tough. I was terrified,
Mm-hmm.
but determined that no matter what I did, no matter what I could find on the streets, could not be any worse than what I was finding at home.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, if I was going to fail, I was going to fail on my own terms. And I was going to fail trying to become somebody different than what I grew up with. And it was hard. I learned to it I unfortunately I learned how not to trust just about anybody, which was
Mm-hmm.
something I had to unlearn later in life.
Mm-hmm.
And that was but migrant workers, when you're working on, it's typical scenario in Southern California, LA, migrant workers, you basically would wait on a corner at 4 o'clock in the morning, trucks would come along and look for workers. They weren't looking for your papers, they weren't looking for your age, they were just basically looking for a strong back willing to put in a 16, 18-hour day. And that gave me enough to eat. I couldn't really rent any place because I was only 13. So I either I found multiple ways to sleep under bridges, sometimes the back seats of unlocked cars, sometimes open walkways in apartment buildings before I would get kicked out. Every once in a while, somebody would have pity on me and give me a couch for a few days or a week or so. It was a very difficult time. I
Mm-hmm.
would not recommend it to anybody, but for me, I had my choices were so slim and so difficult that it was the better option for me. Now, I ultimately, after several months, I did go home for about a year, so I could earn a GED. But then I left home for good at age 15, before my 16th birthday. And by then I had a GED. By then, at least I had the confidence that I was a little older. I was closer to 16, so I could start faking my way into early jobs and where they wanted you to be 16. So I could work construction workers, and I dug ditches, and I, drove produce trucks, and I did all kinds of junky, nowhere, aimless, dead end jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I was determined that I was going to eat, that I was going to feed myself. I had no way to go home. There was no going back. There was no, "Hey, Mom, I'm hungry this week. Can you send me a little bit of food money?" There was no going home for Christmas or the holidays to talk about what my needs were. I learned that if I'm going to fail or succeed, I had to do it based on my own ability to sacrifice and work. And that was what I learned.
Mm-hmm.
So when I did get the opportunity to go to school, I was well educated in what the costs of not going to school were,
Mm-hmm.
what the lifestyle was, what the ramifications, what the income, what the future was. And so even though I wasn't doing good at first, I couldn't allow that to the initial failure to basically shortchange my ability to keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
Until I had ultimately failed out, I hadn't failed out, so I was going to keep working,
Mm-hmm.
and it worked out well. I mean, I once my brain started actually clicking, and it did click after a time, and not only started clicking, but I just ended up as one of the, just I being told my entire life that I was dumb and stupid and worthless. I was the last one to acknowledge the fact that I was actually very smart and hardworking and innovative and had all these attributes that I never would have guessed. Who would have known? And so it was as much of a surprise to me as it was to anybody else, I have to say. But it did come out, and I got, as I said, to get along, to go from sleeping under, bridges to being asked to fly in the corporate jet with the president, to go on this trip, to being asked my opinion from CXOs because my opinion to them mattered to them, and part of it was I got recognition for building a computer model, a macroeconomic model that forecasts the GNP and interest rates. And because I was building to prove a theory that I had developed, I was, again, tireless in how I worked on it. And I wound up outperforming the Federal Reserve and pretty much every bank and model in the nation.
Wow.
And that got me a lot of attention. It got me my first jobs, but I continued that process of trying to think ahead and look to the future and try and innovate on technology. And that really kind of set my career apart. I worked on artificial intelligence in early stages of the internet, and early stages of the cloud computing, early stages of a number of different things where I got to kind of be at the forefront before the world had adapted to all of these things. So I've been honored and blessed in my career, but it didn't mean that it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
Because of my childhood, I was dealing privately while my career was going really well. For most of my career went extremely well. Privately, I suffered. I had addictions. I had chronic depression. I had hyperanxiety. I could barely, if you put me in front of an analytical group of people, I was brilliant. If you put me in front of a social situation at a cocktail party, I was lost. And I didn't know how to relate to people. I was terrified that people knew that I had all these internal issues and that somehow I would be seen and people would know who I really was. And it took me decades to work through all of those issues.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it was more of a desire not to allow my past, or the wounds of my past, to define my future. Even though that was my desire, it took a long time to make that the reality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And while you were talking, Guy, I was thinking about what I had read before, what you were stating, because even that you had struggled with your faith at one particular time, and without even the depression and multiple addictions, but that part of struggling with your faith, because it's like, God, how can I go through all of these things? And then you struggle with, why did God allow you to have to go through those? And there may be some listeners that are listening right now saying, wow, God has been through all of that. Why did he have to go through that at 13? Why did he have to go through those experiences as a child? What would you say to those that are listening right now that are questioning their salvation because of the multiple addictions they may be having or suffering with chronic depression? What advice would you give them regarding those that are questioning their salvation?
God didn't call perfect people. He called people who were flawed. And he was gracious to them. I never once saw Christ admonish his disciples for their imperfections. He admonished them to continue to keep their eye on what their objectives should be. And I will be honest, there were times when I thought I blamed God for the kind of childhood I had, and that if I hadn't had that kind of childhood, with the kind of brains that I had and the kind of talents, natural talents I discovered that I had, I could have gone even much, much farther than I had, because I was if I was willing to drink the corporate Kool-Aid, as it were. But I always think about. There was a scripture that always resonated with me. It's a scripture where that talks about two men go to the temple, and one of them stands up and says, I'm thankful that I'm a good person and that I've done all these great things, and I tithe and I do all these good things, and I'm not like Guy Morris over there who struggles with his addictions and his depression and his faith and is constantly doubting who he is and what he wants. And Guy Morris is over there beating his chest saying, Lord, I know that I've got issues. I know I'm flawed. I know that, but I'm asking for mercy, because that's not who I want to be. And according to scripture, the guy Morris in the corner went away more justified than the other. And I couldn't. And Paul once wrote that God had given him a thorn in the side to keep him humble. And over time, I became convinced that my PTSD was there to keep me from drinking the corporate Kool-Aid of greed and self-righteousness and self-entitlement. That my illnesses were there to keep me focused on my relationship with God and how I needed God to get to that next step in life. And that it wasn't God hating me as much as God allowing the diseases of the world to impact me just enough where I knew that I needed God. There's in the beginning of the Beatitudes, there's a scripture that says, "Blessed are those who are poor in spirit." And somebody said that they interpreted that to say, "Blessed are those who know their need of God." And I had to I had to accept it that way. I realized that I couldn't change my life, and that I also was educated enough to know that there were people in Yemen that were starving to death, that there were people in Africa that had absolutely no opportunities. There were people in Western China that were persecuted just because they weren't Chinese. That as much as I hated my childhood, as much as I hated my upbringing, as much as I was envious of those who had it easier, who could go to high school and go home and know that they had a decent place to go home to and actually have friends. And as much, instead of envying all those who had so much more than I had and that I wanted for myself, I began to try and focus on how I was blessed relative to all of those who didn't have even as much as I had. And so it's about perspective and putting all of it in a balanced perspective, and not allowing the woe is me to bully the willingness to be not necessarily blessed, because there were times I didn't feel blessed. I felt under a curse. But there were times when I had to appreciate the fact that the Lord had given me a way out. It wasn't an easy way. It wasn't a simple way. The Lord told his disciples that they would give up their lives for the testimony of their faith. And so far, I haven't been asked to lay down my life. I was just simply asked to readjust my priorities, to take accountability for my envy, to take accountability to face the man that I was, addictions, flaws, filthy mouth, filthy mind, to face the person I was in order to become the man I wanted to be. And that really, that's a fair thing for God to ask us. That if we want to be that kind of man that does get blessed, that is in his that people will regard highly, that we earn it. And we don't earn it just simply because we were born into the perfect family and grew up in the perfect lifestyle and didn't have any of the issues necessary that drove people to become addicts, the hopelessness that drives people to become addicts, the wounds that drive people to become addicts. People are addicted because something has happened inside their spirit. And rather than focusing on that, to focus on how God could basically help me heal that spirit. And willing to take that time, willing to let it be my lifelong thorn in the side, willing to let it be my lifelong motivation to not get proud, to stay humble, and to stay malleable for God to make changes.
That, thank you so much for sharing that, God, because that's so important. And I think a lot of times we look at that, when I was growing up as a child, I didn't have a great childhood. It was an abusive family. experienced sexual abuse and so many things. And people would always ask me, how did you get through it? How did you, why didn't you blame God? But, I understood even at a young age that God isn't to blame. People will be people and the enemy will use who he can, but we have a choice to make and a decision to make of what we're going to do, even with our life that we have today. And certainly the Lord is with you for what you have done now. And you've been talking about the different tragedies that you've gone through. And I think that is just awesome to be able to hear it. And even for the listeners to be able to hear, because even with you going through that, even as a result of you going through those ups and downs, you've now achieved fame as an award-winning author, where many of your major characters have survived extreme trauma or mental illness, and they're working to overcome and thrive, as well as finding their faith in life. So I'm ready to hear about those, some of those series. So just let the listeners know, this is what I was leading up to. So we want to hear about it.
I think there's a couple of things about my books that I think my readers tend to enjoy. One of them is that they're all rooted, even though they're fictional thrillers, they're all deeply rooted in factual events and technologies and history. And for example, my espionage artificial intelligence series that started with a book called Swarm is based on a true event. And that event was, I accidentally discovered, because of my work and all the research I did, I discovered that a program, through an Associated Press article, that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories at Sandia, which is an NSA spy lab. And that story just captivated me. So I spent almost a year trying to figure out how a spy program could escape the NSA and what they might have designed it to do that it needed that amazing stealth capability when 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. They were rather perturbed that I had figured out something they thought should be top secret, and even more perturbed that I was willing to tell people about it. I built a webisode series to do this and got an option from one of the studios. And so they wanted me to take the site down. I was laughing at them. I was tickled pink. I was like, yes, I must have nailed it, or the FBI wouldn't be at the door. My wife had a different view. She pulls me aside. She's like, why are there 2 FBI agents in my dining room? And what did you do, buddy? And I was like, I didn't do anything. And, I just geeked out. What can I say? So that program that escaped, I turned into a character in the books. And that character has now, as part of its growth towards what we call singularity, the ability for a single computer program to function as smart as a human, and we're really at that now. So long before ChatGPT and all of this other stuff, I was writing about where we would be in artificial intelligence at this time. And because I could just project along the trend lines. And we're very close to a conscious AI right now, much closer than some people want to think. And so I made that program in AI, and that artificial intelligence now has decoded end time prophecy. Now, none of the other characters are particularly religious, so it doesn't deal with the dogma, doesn't deal with the reason I used an AI to introduce that concept was because I can now strip away the typical problem in a lot of prophecy teachings, or what I call cultural and religious biases. So we come at prophecy with the false notion that prophecy is there for us to tell the future. And it's not. It's there for us to interpret the present as it happens. And so there were a lot of biases about how we interpreted these allegories about what it would mean. And of course, it would mean that the Protestants would call the Catholics the Antichrist, and the Catholic, or they would call the Muslim, the Islamic nation, the beast. And so we got all of these mixed up biases involved in trying to interpret what prophecies meant, as opposed to analyzing when events actually, there's 2 parts of prophecy. There's the allegory, and then there's the outcome. And if we focus just on the outcome, it turned out that from my analytical mind, I could actually calculate the things that had actually occurred and the probability of those occurrences and the probability of those occurrences together. And that allowed me to basically take, from an AI perspective, how an AI might interpret artificial intelligence, and just talk about the events going on in the world and the probabilities of those events relative to prophetic utterances and where we're at. And so that now that allows me to kind of start taking it's espionage, it's artificial intelligence, but it's looking at political corruption, religious corruption, world events, including climate change, the rise of fascism, artificial intelligence itself, all the other technologies that we're using, how the AI is being used in warfare and weapons and espionage and spying. And it allows me to really kind of deal with the world as it really is through this artificial lens of a machine intelligence interpreting biblical prophecies in a non-religious way. Now, to balance that, I wanted to make sure that my characters, they say that you should write what you know. And I say, write what you know, or write what you're willing to invest in the time into researching so that you could know something new. But when it came to characters, I didn't want the typical Tom Clancy or Robert Ludlum, trained Navy SEAL, CIA super spy who can kill you 7 ways before breakfast, sir. And so I have my characters, each of my main characters at least, reflect a trauma in their life. In one case, it might be the loss of a parent at age 13. In the case of my main character, in many ways is similar to me in that he went through 16 different schools, and he was basically estranged as a kid and had to witness the murder-suicide of his parents. And so he's a genius hacker living under the name of a best friend who died in an explosion that was meant for him. And so he's constantly on the run, constantly looking over his shoulders, traumatized by his foster care childhood and the things that he's had in his past. And so while he's the hero and he's constantly finding the courage to do the right thing, he's constantly struggling with his own self-doubt. He's struggling with his ability to trust other people, with his ability to be honest with other people. He's a chronic liar because he's always hiding who he is. And so he's aware of the fact that he's got these issues, but he's still trying to struggle through how to do the right thing for the right people in the right way. And so another character is an autistic genius, can't function in a social situation at all, completely antisocial type of person, multiple piercings and tattoos and rings, but a total cyber genius who's better at relating to the computers than anybody else. And so I'm trying to find the ability to express what's going on in the world through the eyes of people who have been wounded by the world. And not be your typical, I'm doing this for the red, white, and blue type of character. I'm doing it because somebody's going to suffer if I don't. And it allows me to kind of build in not only that sense of self-doubt and that sense of hesitation, that sense of anxiety that makes your hands tremble, that sense that these aren't just courageous people who go do the incredibly stupid thing without thinking about it. They're scared to death, and they're seeing no other option. And that, I think, for me, makes them more human. It makes them more, even the one Navy lieutenant, her mother passed away when she was 12 from cancer. She had to grow up under a Joint Chief Admiral. And though she's extremely accomplished and extremely confident on the outside, there's always a part of her that misses her mother, that has rejected now her admiral father as being too harsh, and so she's got, every one of them have family issues of some sort. Every one of them have acceptance issues of some sort. And I want to kind of build that in, rather than talking about my traumas per se. I wanted to build in the kind of characteristics in terms of how I had to overcome those things in order to achieve anything. I wanted my characters to do the same, that they have to work through, as opposed to just assuming that these are great people that were of great families and perfect, American for 10 generations. And, dad was a successful this or successful, mom was a successful that. I wanted characters that I felt I could relate to more, and that I wanted others who were struggling with what they believed about themselves, what they believed about prophecy, what they believe about America and the world. I wanted my books to enable people to really explore these things in a thoughtful way.
And when you were talking about that guy, I have a brother, he suffers with autism. So when you started mentioning just to be antisocial, they're very antisocial, but on one end, they're very intelligent.
Super
My
intelligent.
brother, he could read. He was 3 years old reading encyclopedias. I mean, and he could tell you information, he could feed it back to you. So while you were talking about that, I was like, I have to get this for my brother because he's autistic, but on the other hand, he has like memory like nobody's business.
Well, and my autistic character is one of, when I ask people, they say he's one of their favorite characters because he's autistic. He's brilliant. He used to do cryptology for the CIA, but left the CIA because he couldn't fit in. He's now working but he's actually in a place where he's accepted and loved for who he is and for the skills that he has by the main character, because the main character is also flawed. And so I allow people to basically have their tics and their oddities and their ways of communicating that are off-putting at times.
I love it.
Show how they're brilliant in other ways that other people can't even approach.
I love it, God. I love it. And I believe that's why it's gotten as much traction as it has, because it's not just coming from being a perfect person, but a flawed person who can be successful
and see the world for what it is without drinking the Kool-Aid of saying, well, I'm one of the better ones. I'm and it would have been easy for me working at the level of organizations and being successful as I was in my career to really take on that mentality. And it was my own internal struggles that kept me from basically accepting myself in that realm. Because I had known growing up, I knew I couldn't accept when people talked about immigration. I worked alongside these people, shoulder to shoulder with them. They're hard working people, ask for very little in life. And I couldn't accept the biases and the bigotries. I was because we were poor, I was constantly sort of the token white kid in the Hispanic neighborhood or the hood. And so I could never accept any of those internal biases. At the same time, working hard, I could never accept laziness as an excuse for poverty, because I had worked my way out, and it was really hard work, but I did it. And so I'm constantly trying to find the humanity in these scenarios that we see around the world right now that are making everyone nervous. And while I believe I talk about the prophecy, talking about that we've approached end times, I use it as a way of saying, this is an opportunity. This isn't gloom and doom. This is the chance for someone, your doctor, to come to you and telling you, not today and not tomorrow, but you have a terminal disease and that you've only got about 7 to 10 years to live. Make sure you're living well. Make sure you're making the right choices. Make sure you're evaluating your own priorities and your own faith and your own walk and your own self-worth, because that's what you have time for right now. It's not about building wealth. It's not about providing wealth for generations to come. It's not about your legacy in the world. It's not about your success. It's about we all have a expiration date. It's about using your expiration date time. If prophecy is a way to wake up the world to say, this is your chance to reevaluate your direction before it's too late. And prophecy, when I started realizing how many prophecies have already been fulfilled and how that wasn't fulfilled in the way that the allegory talked about, but it was fulfilled nonetheless, I came to one of the conclusions, which is prophecy is not about God coming to destroy humanity. but about God telling us how humanity would destroy itself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so we're on that phase, we're on that track. And that allows me to start looking at the world with different eyes and different viewpoints. And rather than getting hyper anxious about all the things that are going wrong, and there are a lot of things going wrong, I can reassure myself to say, well, that's what's supposed to happen.
mm-hmm,
That was what we were told to expect. And what we were told to do from that expectation was not buy a gun, not arm up, not build a bunker, not try and stop whatever we thought was causing the problem. But every single command that went along with the knowledge of what was going on went to basically doing what I had to spend a lifetime doing, which is look inside and change who I am so that I'm better prepared. When we talk about the 10 virgins, 5 of them ready, 5 of them not. The 10 virgins who were ready were the ones that were prepared with oil in their lamps. That was their own internal ability to find joy and peace in all of those things, and not something external to them.
mm-hmm.
So we're at a point where Christianity should not be about where we go to church. It's not about the community. God didn't call communities, he called individuals. He called individual disciples. We each get to make our own choices. And so I don't have to get upset if I think the church is apostate in places, because that's what we're told to expect.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to get upset because evil is rising up in power in the world, because that's what we're told to expect.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to get too worried about the fact that the environment and climate and pollution are getting so great that my poor grandchildren are going to inherit this mess, because that's what we're told to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And so if those things are actually factually true to a statistically significant level, and it is very statistically significant, I actually did the math. The computer algorithms that I have my AI doing in the book, I actually did at one point. I actually built that model. I used computer programs and I used big data sources from an oil and gas company. And I came up with using only 15 prophecies, probabilities of 1 in 1.4 trillion against random chance. So because the math is so overwhelming, I don't have to worry about whether it's true. I just have to worry about what's my response to this.
Mm-hmm.
How would, if I had the Messiah sitting across the coffee table from me right now, what kind of advice would he be giving me?
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't be join a political party and take up a cause. It wouldn't be many of the things, it wouldn't be going on Twitter and ranting about the world. It wouldn't be, all of the things that we feel somehow that we're compelled to do to have a voice. And I think that's in part one of the reasons why I was led to write books when I retired, was because this allows me to basically, that's my voice. That's my ability to put this complicated scenario, from worldly events to artificial intelligence to prophecies and flawed people, in a context that says they don't get saved in the first book, and it's not all about this sort of superficial sort of experience. It's about an evolution of them understanding and changing and evolving to get to that place. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot more realistic than I think that I get out of, that I hear out of some of the sermons I've heard on the topic. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my motive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you know what? And I really love that. And we may have listeners that's listening right now that is really being encouraged by your story, because I know I've been encouraged, but they have been experiencing some type of tragedy before, or experiencing it now, and going through ups and downs in life. Would you just say a brief prayer for those that may be listening, that they can make their transition into where they're supposed to be before their expiration date?
Lord, for everyone who's hurting.
Yes, Lord.
Everyone, Lord, I pray this every night. For those who are suffering from the inhumanity to man, for those who are suffering from greed and avarice, from those who are suffering from all the spirits that basically destroy the world, and those spirits that destroy each other, Lord, I just ask that you would just raise up a candle of hope
Yes.
and the window of darkness for each of those souls. That as bad as it looks, it does not mean that it cannot get better.
Yes, Lord.
And it does not mean that it's the situation in our lives that need to change, but it's how we relate to the situation that needs to change.
Yes, Lord.
Lord, in the strength that you build, that you don't build blessed mansions for people that are faithful. You build secure walkways through the trial.
Yes, Lord.
You don't take us out of the valley of the shadow of death. You take us through it.
Yes, Lord.
And it's the journey through where we will find our salvation. And I ask that you bring a spirit of courage and hope and belief and perseverance and just enough strength to get through the day, to do what we need to do today, to be faithful. And not try and put on us the burden that we have to be perfect, or we have to be what the world wants us to be, or we have to be what the world expects us to be. And we don't have to be that today. We can even be fail today and know that tomorrow your mercies renew and that we still have a chance to change. That in all my days, Lord, in trying to walk with you, there have been many, countless days of failure. You gave me the opportunity to wake up the next day and try again. And it's in that hope, that mercy that's renewed every day, that I just pray you put in the hearts of every person listening to this.
Yes, Lord.
In your name.
Yes, Lord. Amen. Well, thank you so much, God, for being a part of the show today and just sharing with us all of your wonderful books and just your testimonies of the things that you have experienced. And if the listeners wanted to get in touch with you or to purchase your books, what is the best way to reach you?
The easiest starting point, which will give you links to all the other social media, emails, and everything else, is my website, GuyMorrisBooks.com. And that will give you buy links. It also links you to all the other reviews and other highlights. There's fact versus fiction pages. There's links to my social media, my press kits, all the information you would need to try and either communicate. And if you want to buy a signed copy of the book, you can buy it from the website.
Awesome, awesome, listeners. So make sure to go check out Guy and find out more about his series because it is hot. Go make sure you check it out. And thank you again so much, Guy, for being a part of the podcast today. We were so blessed to have you. And listeners, until next time, God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you for listening to Tasty Tidbits with Dr. Tiffany Watkins. If you're enjoying the show, feel free to subscribe, rate, and share with your friends. To learn more about Dr. Tiffany, check out her blog on Goodreads.com or visit her website at www.renewedfaithministriesinc.com. Until next time, stay blessed.